Doom Patrol did not have to die, and in fact, it wasn't even a moral or logical or noble sacrifice that they made. I'm referring to the end of one of the weirdest comics in the history of the Silver Age, Doom Patrol. And if we look at this cover, we see a reproduction right here on the archive edition of the final issue, which is the death issue. It's kind of notorious in the history of comics that Doom Patrol was around for 41 issues. Their final issue is numbered 121, but that's because they picked up the numbering from a comic called My Greatest Adventure, which is where they debuted. And then they changed the title to Doom Patrol, and they picked up the numbering. Their first issue was 80, and their last issue was 121, so they were in 41 issues. Not a bad little run. But the word came down from DC to cancel Doom Patrol because their sales had dropped to 250,000. Dropped to 250,000. So they canceled it. Of course, what else are you going to do with a comic that's only selling 250,000 copies? I've said this in other videos, and it's absolutely a historical fact that during the golden age of comics routinely sold in the hundreds of thousands, and the hit comics sold millions. And comics in the golden age, the original age of comics, that had sales lower than 200,000 were routinely canceled by most publishers in the golden age. In the Silver Age, after the whole Comics Code fiasco and the whole investigation of comic books by Congress, instigated by Dr. Wortham, fraud, as far as I'm concerned, pop psychology fraud. After that whole fiasco, the industry was rocked. It was on hard times, and circulations were way down in the Silver Age. So most of the comics in the Silver Age had lower circulations, but 250,000 at that point was a threshold below which DC Comics did not want to go. Now, sadly, most of the DC and Marvel comics published today are well under 250,000. In fact, most of their prestige characters, their A-list characters, are under 250,000, which is pretty shocking. You know, Wonder Woman had a big movie come out this year, and her title sells less than 100,000 copies a month. It's a very marginal title. There are worse titles, though. Most of the Marvel Universe is well under 100,000 now. Shocking. But let's get back to Doom Patrol. If you want to know more of my opinions on what Marvel should do, you should see my other video telling Marvel they should basically cancel everything and start over at this point. So Doom Patrol died at the end of their last issue. And I did a long tape on Doom Patrol, and this is just an addendum at the end of that to go a little bit deeper into the moral and philosophical points raised by this last issue. The thing is that Arnold Drake, who's a very skilled and capable writer, was the writer of Doom Patrol, wrote all of the stories in Doom Patrol, all 41 issues. And Arnold Drake, great writer, had more than 2,000 comic book stories to his credit in his career. Very prolific writer. And Drake was put in a sort of a bad position by the cancellation of this book, which he clearly was having a lot of fun writing. And he asked DC if he could kill off the characters in the last issue, which was a very unusual request. But I kind of have the feeling that Arnold Drake wanted Doom Patrol to remain special and not be brought back a few years later with a different writer and a different artist and have a completely different approach. In other words, I don't think Arnold Drake really wanted them bastardizing his concept. I think he wanted to leave it pure the way him and the artist Bruno Premiani created it. So he made the request, and DC didn't really care one way or the other, so they authorized the request. And Arnold Drake was then faced with a dilemma, because it's very hard to kill your heroes at the end without letting the villain win. Pardon me while I take a sip. I've been up all night working my straight job, and I just have a little Bushmills here to help me sleep after I record this video. And also because it tastes so good. So Arnold Drake, I have been up all night. I totally lost the thread. He had a dilemma. The dilemma, that's where I was. The dilemma is that if the heroes die, then the villain by default has won. and you don't want to end the comic with villains winning. So he was trying to have them die, yet at the same time die upholding some sort of principle, so that you could say that they were somehow sacrificing themselves in a noble way. Unfortunately, he completely failed with the scenario that he came up with. The scenario that he came up with, and it's an entertaining comic. I take nothing away from its entertainment value. But philosophically, the scenario that he came up with is not a good or workable or logical scenario for them to kill themselves. The scenario is that a neo-Nazi, a literal neo-Nazi, this is only in the 1960s. Remember, the World War II only ended 20-some years earlier. Okay, possibly 30 years earlier. So there were still Nazis alive in the 60s, definitely. This neo-Nazi, whose name I am looking up, he was a submarine captain. And it was Captain Zahl, Z-A-H-L. Captain Zahl teamed up with the stretchy woman of evil, Madame Rogue from the Brotherhood of Evil. These two teamed up on the Doom Patrol. And Madame Rogue actually was promised by Captain Zahl that the Doom Patrol would not be killed. But Captain Zahl was determined to humiliate the chief. He had a grudge against the chief going back to the war, apparently. And so Captain Zahl was actually declared dead 15 years earlier and had some sort of metal neck. It's a little obscure point in the comic because it's mentioned in passing, but it's never really emphasized in the art that he has this metal neck. I don't know why you would need a metal neck. If you're still alive, you would think whatever's on the outside of your neck, it might be unsightly, but you need to replace it with metal. I mean, all the plumbing still works, so I don't know why you would need a metal neck. But that's one of those bizarre, surreal things that Doom Patrol was absolutely full of. So we ignore that. But so Captain Zahl had this wonderful plan to humiliate the Doom Patrol on live TV. And his plan was that he would capture them. And he succeeded in capturing them. And he has them all trapped on this island that he is ready to explode. I can't remember if it was wired to explode or if he shoots some sort of explosive torpedo into it. I think it was wired to explode. Yes. And he also has a small little fishing village with only 14 people in it in Cape Cod, wired to explode. And he's got 2 plungers. And he captures the Doom Patrol on this island that is wired to explode, and they're helpless. They can't. He gives them 2 minutes. He's running them down and saying, "What do you prize above all else, my democratic doctor? Your image as a freedom fighter? 9? You would love to die for glorious mankind, yeah? But would you die for their smallest part of it?" And so he's got these 2 plungers, and he gives the Doom Patrol 2 minutes to decide. I'm either going to blow you guys up, or I'm going to blow up this little fishing village with 14 random people in it. And the Doom Patrol decides, against all logic, reason, and morals, to let Captain Zahl blow them up, rather than blow up the 14 people. And this is framed as being a noble sacrifice. The chief says, "You heard him, 14 ordinary men, strangers to us. Well, my comrades, you must decide." Now, here's Negative Man, being less negative than he ever is. He said, this is the most outrageous line. He says, "Strangers, chief, didn't you teach us all men are our brothers?" Really, is that what the chief taught you? The head of your super team, he taught you that all men are brothers. We're not talking about Jesus. You're not getting confused here. We're not talking about some religious figure or some moral figure, some philosophical figure. We're talking about the chief taught you that all men were brothers. Right. And then Elastigirl, God bless her, says, "The Pilgrims, they were just ordinary men too, not a genius among them." First of all, you don't know that. You don't know that the Pilgrims weren't geniuses. They got across the ocean pretty good, didn't they? They eked out a life in the New World. They may have been a genius among them, so we don't know that. But let's say the Pilgrims all were ordinary men. No one is denying that ordinary men can do great things. That's not even an issue that's being settled here. And then Robot Man pipes in and says, "And the Hebrew children who..." Wait, do you mean Jewish children? Don't you want to say Jewish? Is there something against saying Jewish in the comics? He says, and the Hebrew children who wouldn't bow to the Pharaoh, just ordinary shepherds and farmers. First of all, I'm not sure, I've read the Bible, and I'm not sure where the hell he's getting this from. I do not remember a story where little Jewish children refused to bow to the Pharaoh. The Pharaoh was the supreme ruler of all of Egypt, and the little Jewish children who came in contact with him were slaves. And I think they did all bow to him. I don't remember any story where they didn't. And the little Hebrew children, they were shepherds and farmers? No, they were slaves. They weren't shepherds and farmers. I don't know what he's talking about here. Is he talking about Jewish children in some neighboring country that aren't under the Pharaoh's dominion refusing to bow to him? Well, of course they didn't if they're not in Egypt. But the Jewish slaves in Egypt were bowing to Pharaoh. I'm sure they were. And it's not a mark against them. You know, when you're a slave, you have to do what you're told or you'll be whipped or executed or something. So it's not a mark against you if you bow to your tyrannical master. I mean, that's not a lack of character if you're a slave and you bow to the guy who has the power to have you tortured to death on a whim. It's not a mark against your character. So they all decide that they're going to let themselves be blown up to save the 14 random people. They all sort of put one hand in on top of each other, and the chief says, "Here is our answer, Captain." And then the 3 Doom Patrol members say, "Fire away," simultaneously. And even though Captain Zal has actually promised Madame Rogue not to kill the Doom Patrol, and she's working with him. She's evil, but she's not that evil. I mean, she wants to continue the relationship and continue to fight the Doom Patrol. He blows them up. And there's actually, I'll show you the explosion. It's right there. That's the death of the Doom Patrol. Right there. There's his sub. There's the explosion. It's all right there. Okay, so I love the Doom Patrol. And Arnold Drake is a great writer. And it's an underrated comic. And nothing that I say about this ending takes away from the fact that this is a fantastic comic. It was a bad note to end on. The surprise factor of it, for most readers, I'm sure, overwhelmed the philosophical issues. But when you think about the philosophical issues involved, there's no logic or nobility to what they did. First of all, number one, there's absolutely no reason why you would believe or trust the word of a mass murderer. This guy's an admitted Nazi. He's wired you to explode. He's wired a random village with 14 people in it to explode. And he wants to explode. He wants to kill somebody. He doesn't want to go away with no kills on his conscience. He doesn't have a conscience. He's a mass murderer. Why would you believe that he would keep his word? So from a logical point of view, there's no reason to believe him. That he has zero credibility as a truth teller. He's the worst kind of evil, mass murdering, literal Nazi. Okay, he's riding around in a German U-boat, for God's sake. Okay, wiring things to explode. After you explode yourself, question: what? After he's had this win over you and got you to explode yourself, what next? Who does he kill next? He's not just going to retire. Now, there seems to be some sort of, the way he set it up, it will be a victory for Captain Zal if the Doom Patrol refuse to be blown up and say, go blow up the strangers. That would be seen as a victory to him because that would somehow make the Doom Patrol out to be hypocrites, I guess the author is trying to say. But it doesn't work that way because it's not hypocrisy. Okay? Yes, ordinary people can do great things. Nobody disagrees with that. But the Doom Patrol were a super team that did great things on a daily and weekly basis, at least a monthly basis. That's how their adventures were chronicled. The Doom Patrol, every issue, is saving humanity from menaces that usually menace more than 14 people. Okay? So if the Doom Patrol blow themselves up, and let's say that Captain Zal takes this like a man and says, wow, they proved me wrong, and just goes home and never again does a bad thing. And Madame Rogue learns her lesson and she goes home and she never again does a bad thing. Well, what happens the next time the Animal, Vegetable, Mineral Man pops up? What happens when General Immortus comes back again to reconquer the world or to attempt to conquer the world again? What happens when one of those classic Doom Patrol giant monstrous alien creature things attacks? How many people get killed when there's nobody there to stop General Immortus? And maybe Madame Rogue did learn her lesson, but the Brain and Monsieur Mala, they haven't learned any lesson. They're still in the Brotherhood of Evil. The Brotherhood of Evil can just recruit a new member to replace Madame Rogue. And then they will be celebrating when the Doom Patrol is gone, and their evil plans will go marching forward. The fact is the Doom Patrol saves more than 14 people on a monthly basis, so it doesn't, from a purely rational, nut-cutting point of view, from a purely unsentimental point of view, it makes no logical sense for them to kill themselves to save 14 random people, and therefore doom uncounted other people that are going to die because the Doom Patrol aren't there to protect the planet anymore. That doesn't make sense. Now, the other part that doesn't make any sense is that Captain Zal is counting on proving them to be hypocrites and also having the joy of having to murder these 14 random people. That's the result that he wants. He wants to both kill the random people and prove the Doom Patrol to be hypocrites. And he's putting this thing on a live television broadcast. So everybody in the world that's watching can see what's going on. Okay? And the Doom Patrol stand up to him. They defy him. They do what he doesn't want them to do, which is sacrifice themselves. Which, in his mind, according to the scenario he's concocted, means that they've proved that they're not hypocrites or phonies, and that his judgment of them was totally wrong. Okay, according to his own scenario that Captain Zal constructed, he's been made a loser. He's sort of triumphed in a way because the Doom Patrol are gone, but he's been proven wrong on national TV. The Doom Patrol, by dying, gets the last laugh on him. Well, obviously the only way that he can one-up that and get the last laugh back is to kill those 14 people anyways and make their sacrifice meaningless. That's the only way that he can walk out of this situation with his head held high. Okay? Because he didn't want to just kill the Doom Patrol. He wanted to prove that they were a bunch of lying, phony hypocrites. Okay? He failed to prove that, so now the only thing he can do to get his back is to kill those random people, and they're already wired for demolition. So the idea that he would hesitate for one moment to push that plunger and kill them also, it doesn't make any sense. Okay? So there's absolutely no reason to believe that killing yourself would prevent those 14 people from dying. Especially since, okay, maybe Captain Zal decides not to kill those 14 people and to honor this scenario that he's cooked up. Okay, even though he's never even promised not to kill them. You know, he's just offered Doom Patrol the choice, but he hasn't said anything about the future. He hasn't promised not to kill these people in the future. So, yeah, maybe he has decided to honor that. But he's going to go home and cook up more evil plans. And he's not even going to go home. His home is a German Nazi submarine. Okay, he's going to go back under the water in his German Nazi submarine and cook up more evil plans involving more people, possibly more than 14. Especially now that you're out of the way and not going to do anything about it. So, makes no sense whatsoever. But the attempt to make it noble, let's just put it this way. Some sacrifices are noble. If I'm walking in the woods with my teenage son and a grizzly bear suddenly comes out of nowhere and attacks, and I was to turn to my son and it's hypothetical and say run, and he starts running, and then I turn back and charge the bear to delay the bear long enough to give my son a chance to get away, I would be dying. But that would be an example, a hypothetical example, of someone making a noble sacrifice. Sacrificing my life for the life of my child. It's not a generalized sacrifice. It's not for just anybody. It's a specific person that I have a reason to sacrifice for. Okay? If I see someone falling onto the train tracks and I risk my life by jumping forward to pull them off, that's not a sacrifice because I'm assuming in my bravado that I can do it without dying. So I'm not deliberately making a sacrifice. but I am deliberately risking myself, and that's also noble. There is nobility in sacrifice. There is nobility in risk, sometimes, but it absolutely depends on the circumstances. Picture yourself in a war zone. You're the officer in charge. You've got 3 or 4 men with you. You get a communication from the enemy. From the enemy. You in that foxhole. We have a dozen hostages over here. Come out of the foxhole and surrender, and we won't kill them. Are you going to do that? Are you going to even believe that they have hostages? And even if you do believe that they have hostages, are you going to believe that they're not going to kill them or do whatever they want to with them because you surrendered? They're just going to laugh at you. They're going to kill you, and they're going to kill them if they even exist. There's no way you would even accept the reality of that proposition as being a truthful thing if you were in a war zone. So if it doesn't work in a more realistic context, it doesn't work in a superhero story either. You know, Gene Roddenberry made this point when he wrote his book about making Star Trek, which I think was called Making Star Trek or something like that. Gene Roddenberry talked about how one of the early scripts that he got from one of the other writers had some sort of crisis on the bridge and some sort of imminent threat on the view screen, and a female lieutenant is supposed to like sob and sort of collapse weeping into Kirk's arms. And she's like a lieutenant, she's like an officer in the Federation. And Gene Roddenberry says to the writer, I mean, he had that scene rewritten, and he says, this doesn't work because you have to take the Federation seriously as a real organization. Picture a modern day scenario, the same thing happening in our Navy. Okay, there's a female officer on the bridge of a ship. Okay, when the enemy attacks the ship, does the female officer collapse in tears into the arms of the captain? No, no. If it doesn't work in a regular real life scenario, if it doesn't make sense, then it doesn't make sense in a science fiction context either. And what I'm saying about this Doom Patrol scenario is that if you take out the superheroes and try and apply it to your own life, or try and apply it to a more rational scenario, you know, the Orlando Post killer, horrible, horrible mass murderer. Okay, the Orlando Post killer. What if he had said to the police during the process of that whole standoff, I've found a dozen people here in this bathroom. I will let them come out if you send in 5 more random people and let me kill them. I'll trade you a dozen for 5. Would the police do that? Of course they wouldn't. Of course they wouldn't. And the primary reason is why would you take this killer's word for it? Well, Captain Zal is every bit as heinous and evil as the Orlando Post killer. I mean, he's a literal World War II Nazi, a genocidal Nazi. You'd be crazy to take his word for anything and enter into any sort of agreement with him, let alone kill yourself to get him to promise not to do something that he's probably going to do anyways. So it's not noble, it's not rational, it's not smart. It's actually probably dooming more people than you save. In addition to your dooming yourself, you're dooming more people than you can possibly save, because all of the previous villains from Doom Patrol and all the future villains that you haven't met yet will all be unopposed, and they'll run amok, and their evil plans will have consequences, and people will die. So that's what I think about the ending of Doom Patrol. I don't mind so much that they're killed. I don't like the fact that they made this irrational and immoral and not at all noble choice to believe what a Nazi says, to enter into a deal with a Nazi and then kill themselves. Don't like it, don't like it, don't like it, don't like it. But everything else about this comic, do like. I do like, I do like, I do like. So, Doom Patrol's a great comic, one of the wildest comics of the 1960s. You should definitely read it. You should definitely catch up on it one of these days and just read it. You'll enjoy it. But that ending, not for me. So that's my view, and I'll be coming back at you later with some more geek stuff. Until then, take care.